Hi, I'm Rob from robandunphoto.com, and it's time for a review that I've been really excited about doing for the last few weeks. It's my budget Canon image stabilization telephoto zoom review. And what I'm going to be trying to be doing in this video is trying to answer two main questions. If you're after a Canon budget telephoto zoom for your crop sensor body, like a 60D, 70D, 600D, 700D, 7D, I think that's crop sensor, isn't it? Then which is better? Should you go for the EFS 55-250 IS2, or should you go for the 70-300 4-5-6 EFIS lens? In other words, which is the better one? And also trying to answer the question, if you've already got the 55-250 IS, is it worth upgrading to the 70-300 IS? Is there a big enough difference in quality between the two to make it a worthwhile upgrade? Now, both these lenses that I'm testing aren't new. If you've been watching the photo stream on Flickr or the YouTube videos or following me on robandunphoto.com, I've had the 55-250 for quite a while, and it wasn't new when I got it, although cosmetically it's in very, very good condition. The 70-300 I bought a few weeks ago, again second-hand, cosmetically very, very good, seems fine. However, one little thing is I dropped my camera bag, which had the 55-250 in it a few weeks ago. You might have seen the video, and it was in the bag like that. And the bag came down, and it smashed the UV filter on the front of it. But the lens seemed okay. I did quite a lot of testing with it afterwards, and everything seems to be good. Now, for the purposes of the review, neither of the lenses have got UV filters on or lens hoods. And remember, lens hoods are always a good idea because they help to reduce flare or glare and increase sort of contrast in your photos. And also, the thing to remember is I'm only reviewing, one copy, and one old copy of each of these lenses, and there can be variations in production runs of lenses, especially budget lenses and especially budget zoom lenses. Can you imagine the number of glass elements there are in each of these lenses? It means that if one of those is slightly out of place, either from new or it's been knocked around, then the performance of the lens can be compromised. So don't just take my word for it. Have a look on different videos, different websites, and make the decision for yourself. And in fact, if you're watching this video on YouTube or robandunphoto.com, in the description down below, you'll see a link. And that link is a download file. It's a big file. I think it's about 150 megabytes of all the test images. Well, most of the test images I took while I was using these lenses. So you can download it and look at these photographs at their full resolution. Maybe even do it as we're going along with the video to give you a really good idea, and you can make your own decision about it. Roger Cicala from lensrentals.com, he runs the test there. He reckons that when they buy all these lenses to hire out to people, they need to return about 2% of the lenses that they buy in because of manufacturing faults. Now, that means it's very, very rare. So the chances of you getting a duff lens, are quite unlikely. However, obviously, if you are buying a second-hand lens, before you hand over the cash, if you're picking it up in person, make sure you have a good look at it to make sure cosmetically it doesn't have any cracks, scratches, or dinks in. Put it on a camera body. Check that the autofocus is nice and smooth. Check that the image stabilization seems to work as well. Now, I know I can't do that if you're buying stuff off eBay. However, if you do buy stuff off eBay, you do have quite a bit of protection if there's something wrong with the lens. eBay are very good at getting money back for people, in my experience. Obviously, if you're buying new, make sure that once you've got the lens, you put it through some tests just so you've got a good one. But lens testing can be a bit of a rat hole, and when you start looking at lenses at 100% on your monitor screen, remember that you don't be too picky. As long as it's good enough, that's all we really care about. Another thing that I should have mentioned as well is if these lenses are basically being tested to go on a crop sensor body, like a 600D, 700D, 750D, 60D, 70D, that sort of thing. If you've got a full frame body, like a 5D Mark II, Mark III, 1DX, that sort of thing. Unfortunately, it would be the 70-300 IS, because the EF-S lenses don't actually fit. Now, all the photos you see in this video were taken in JPEG mode, with no post-processing on them at all. There's no straightening, there's no sharpening, no cropping, no adjustments at all. Because I wanted you to see what you get. And remember, with JPEGs, and even more so with RAW files, if you shoot in RAW, the basic file that comes out of the camera is only really a starting point, isn't it? And you can make the photos look so much better when you start to add levels, curves, clarity, sharpening, is a big one. But I wanted to give you a really good idea of the basic photos that you can get out of a Canon DSLR, with either of these lenses in real world situations as well. You'll see in the photos and the videos that are coming up, down at Hardway, taking photos of a Royal Navy warship on a tripod or handheld, depending on the test I'm doing. And if you're interested as well, the warship is D-37, which is HMS Duncan, which is one of the Navy's latest destroyers. Now, this test is really important to me because it's going to help me decide which lens I'm going to be keeping, the 55-250 IS or the 70-300 IS. If you've listened to the SEL Photography podcast, you'll know that I picked this lens up really cheap a few weeks ago. Ridiculously cheap for what it is. I got it off Gumtree in the UK, and I managed to pick it up for £130, which is an amazing bargain. They go for £200 plus normally second hand. But because it was so cheap, that was the reason I bought it. I wouldn't have bought it for any other reason. I don't have spare money for lenses and things like that. But for £130, I couldn't. In fact, when I emailed the person who was selling it, I couldn't believe they still had it and nobody else had snapped it up. I don't think people knew what it was. So, I've got this lens, but I've already got a telephoto zoom. So one thing I could do is sell the 70-300 IS for quite a nice little profit, and then put that money towards a lens that I haven't got in my arsenal. Say something like the new Canon 10-18 super wide, which is about £300, or maybe an 85-1.8 portrait lens, or a lens that kind of really appeals to me would be a dedicated macro lens, and the 60mm f2.8 macro is well within, if I sold this for sort of 200 quid, would be within reach. Or do I sell the 55-250, maybe with another one of my lenses, say, I don't know, the Mark 150 1.8, to do the same sort of thing. So I'd use that money to fund my next piece of kit. So I really want to find out which is the better lens, the 55-250 IS or the 70-300 IS. Because it matters personally to me as a budget skint photographer. I can't really afford to have two. I'm not a pro, so I don't need to have a spare lens. And so that's why I'm really excited, really interested in what's going to come out of this video. Now, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be looking at the lenses kind of category by category, seeing which one is the best, in each category. And that'll hopefully help us decide which one's the winner. Now, when you're watching this video, try and watch it full screen on YouTube or wherever you're watching at the highest resolution. So that will give you a better idea of the quality of the different photographs from both lenses. And as I said, if you can, and you're on YouTube or robnanphoto.com, download the file, the 150 megabyte file with all the test pictures in, so you can have a look at them yourself as well. Right, let's get started. Okay, so the first categories we're going to be looking at is lens mount, build quality, weight and size. So lens mount, you might think, well, what am I talking about, lens mount? Well, it may well come into consideration because these two lenses do have different lens mounts on the end, these bits underneath here. And the question is, are you going to be sticking with a crop sensor body, like a 600D, 650D, 700D, 750D, 60D, 70D, etc., or in the near future, may you be upgrading to a full frame body? Now, although the lens mounts look very, very similar, they're actually a little different. And full frame, sorry about that. Full frame Canon cameras are EF mount only. They can only take this type of EF mount, whereas your crop sensor bodies like 600D, 700D, etc., can take EF-S, which is the smaller type lenses, and EF mount. So if you're going to be sticking with a crop sensor body for the near future, happy days. If you might be upgrading though to a full frame body soon, then you'll probably look towards the 70 to 300. Now, the 55 to 250 has a plastic lens mount, and the 7300 has a metal mount. However, one of the things I'd sort of say is that, again, I think it's lensrentals.com, if you do it, they did extensive tests on whether having a plastic or metal lens mount makes any difference to the overall structure and integrity of a camera, and they came to the conclusion it doesn't. You're just as likely to break a camera that's got a metal lens mount as you would with a camera with a plastic lens mount. So I think, if in terms of versatility for the lens mount, the kind of winner has to be the 70 to 300, I guess, because if you buy this lens, if you buy the 55 to 250, you can only fit that to crop sensor bodies, whereas if you buy the 70 to 300, you can fit that to crop sensor bodies and full frame bodies. So the 70 to 300 is the winner in the lens mount category. As far as build quality goes, as I said, the 70 to 300 has that metal lens mount, and it definitely feels more substantial. It feels like a better built lens, whereas the 55 to 250 definitely feels like a kit lens. Very plasticky, quite lightweight, which may well be an advantage. Both lenses, when you zoom them, they extend. Like L lenses, they kind of stay and everything's inside. And both lenses, let's turn the lock off like that. And both lenses, when you focus them, the ends spin round. You can see that there, which can be it's not really an issue, but it's a thing to think about when you're using polarizing filters. So, as far as build quality, I'd have to say that the 70 to 300 definitely feels a lot better, a lot more substantial, chunkier and better made. So that's the winner in terms of build quality. As far as weight and size goes, though, I mean, the 55 to 250, this one weighs just under 400 grams, whereas the 70 to 300 weighs 630 grams. So it's significantly lighter, this one. And as you can see, it's significantly smaller. If we retract them like that, let's turn the manual focus off. The 55 to 250 is quite a lot smaller. And that's a real advantage when you're walking around all day with your camera bag on your shoulder. As I said, I've owned this lens for a number of years now, and I don't have any problem carrying around a camera bag all day with my 600D, or was my 350D, with a 55 to 250 and the kit lens, the 18 to 55 on it as well. So I think if we're talking in terms of weight and size, the 55 to 250 definitely has the edge because it's smaller and it's lighter and it's easier to carry around. Right, let's talk focusing distances. More specifically, the minimum focusing distance, so the closest you can focus with either the 70-300 IS or the 55 to 250 IS. And the 55 to 250 IS can focus, the closest it can focus is about 1.1 meters, which is about 3.6 feet, and obviously out to infinity. And the 70 to 300 IS can focus at its closest point about 1.5 meters, which is about just under 5 feet to infinity. Now, both of the lenses have a limited macro capability as well. So basically what you do to kind of make the most of that is you zoom all the way out, like so, and then you focus on something that's as close as that. So what we're saying is at full zoom, the 55 to 250 can focus at something just over a meter away, and this one can focus on something that's 1.5 meters away. So that obviously gives the 55 to 250 a little bit of an edge in terms of its focal distance, because you can use it not as a true macro lens. I mean, you're not blowing stuff up massively, but for nice shots of flowers or big insects, I think we've really got to declare the 55 to 50 the winner in the focusing distance category, because it just gives you that slight edge, that slight more little bit of elbow room to focus on things that are a little bit closer. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is focal range. So, in other words, what you can see with that lens. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to kind of flick over to a screencast, and we're going to go in and we're going to actually see photos. We're going to look at them in a little bit more detail so you can get an idea of, when you put one of these lenses on your camera, what will the photographs look like in terms of the angle of view you get and how close you can get to your subject. Right, okay, so let's have a look at what you'll see if you fitted one of these lenses to your camera, the 55-250 IS or the 70-300 IS. Let's look at the short end or the wide end first. Let's have a look here. So what you can see here is this is a view taken with my 600D with the 55-250 on it, set to 55mm, so it's as wide as it can go. And we're looking across to Portsmouth Harbour, and this ship in the middle, that's the one we're going to be kind of concentrating on to do all our tests. Let's flick over to the 70-300. So this is the 70-300, taken f8, and again, so you can see the slight difference in angle of view that we've got. That's the 55-250, and that's the 70-300 at its widest setting. I'll tell you what, while we're here, should we have a quick zoom in? So there we go. Looks all right, doesn't it? Remember, there's been no adjustments attached to these. Let's have a look at the other one. Let's zoom in. Very nice indeed. Now, one thing to bear in mind, obviously, is if you've got 18-55 and you do move up to something like the 70-300, you can have a little bit of a hole in your focal range from 55 to 70, but you can just move backwards and forwards. So that's the wide end. As you can see, there isn't really that much difference. Let's now have a look at the long end, the telephoto zoom end. So here we go. So again, this photo taken with the 600D on a tripod at f8 with the 55-250 IS on the camera, looking across to that same ship, and we're zoomed all the way to 250mm. So that's the view you would get. But if you were to put the 70-300 on and then zoom that all the way, you would get that. You would get slightly closer. Let's just move those so we can almost superimpose them one on the other. So that's the 55-250. And that's the 70-300. So the extra 50mm gives you that extra little bit of angle of view. So you kind of got to decide, is the extra money worth it? However, one of the things you can do with the 70-300, because it is an EF mount, you can mount a teleconverter to it as well. And I've got a Jessup's 2x teleconverter for Canon EF lenses. And if you were to do that, you would end up with that view there. So we're zoomed in even more. So if we go back to that's the 55-250 at 250, and then if we go to the 70-300 at 300 with a 2x teleconverter on, making it up to obviously 600mm, and then if you take into account the crops factor as well, add on another half, we're talking 900mm. Let's see there. In case you're just scoffing at it, saying, well, it isn't going to be that sharp. Well, it is on a tripod. I think I took it at f8. Let's zoom into 1:1. It's not terrible, is it? I mean, that's 100%. Any lens, when you zoom into 100%, will have a bit of, won't be perfect. And I'm taking this across water. There could have been a bit of a heat shimmer but we've seen, I mean, that's the ship's, that thing there that we look at in the middle, that will be like a ship's badge, which is probably, I would imagine, probably about 6 inches across, And in fact, if we just scroll around, let's see if we can see anything interesting. There's I think that's a goalkeeper gun. So maybe, in fact, if you listen to the podcast, I'll tell you a funny story about what happened. In fact, I'll tell you now. As I was taking these photos, this car pulled up, and this guy got out and started taking pictures right next to me. And remember, I was down at Hardway, so there's nobody else in sight, and he was standing right next to me taking pictures with his mobile phone of the same things across the dockyard. I thought, hello, this might be a secret policeman or something. And he was clicking away. I sort of tried to have a conversation with him, because the thing about the Portsmouth dockyard is, you can see everything. You can look across and you can see all the ships, all the latest stuff. But anyway, I digress. There's the 70-300 with a 2x teleconverter on. So that may well be worth looking at. So back to the 55-250 at 250. That's the 70-300 at 300. And that's the 70-300 with a 2x teleconverter on. There we go. So what do you think about the focal range of those lenses? there's not that much bigger difference, is there, really, between the 55 to 250 and the 70 to 300 when you look at the long end lenses, all the wide lenses as well. But when you put that teleconverter on, wow, it really does punch it up. So I don't know. You've got to look at it again and decide, is it worth the extra money to get the extra reach? One thing I will say, however, is that with DSLRs now, like my 600D that I'm doing this video with, its maximum resolution, it runs at 18 megapixels, which means that you can really crop in quite a long way. So even the 55 to 250 at the long end, you can still do a fair bit of cropping to that, and it will still be great for printing and the web. And if you use Photoshop to blow things up, and you can use your bicubic and all the different ways it does of adding pixels to images, and it probably works with Lightroom actually and other things, you'd be amazed how small images you can blow them up very, very big, especially if you're printing. For example, I took a photo of Oliver that I blew up to huge size and got it printed by Photobox. Massive, massive print. And I took that with my 350D, which I think is a 7 megapixel camera, and it looked great. So, don't get too obsessed by focal length. However, saying that, there is no substitute for optical zoom. And I think the winner of the focal range category has to be the 70-300, because it does have that extra reach. It does have the ability to add teleconverters to it, aftermarket ones which are relatively cheap. I know you do lose a bit of optical quality, and obviously you lose 2 stops of light as well with a 2x1. But the fact that you can get out there and you can get those images in camera is pretty impressive to me. So in terms of focal range, the winner for me has to be the 70-300 with its extra reach and its ability to add teleconverters. Now, the next category we're going to be looking at is image stabilization, to kind of compare how they work on either lens. So what I did was I took my camera off the tripod, and I was shooting again towards that ship, and I was shooting, I think, f11 to start off with auto ISO. I was in manual mode, so that I could vary the shutter speed. I started off at a 500th of a second, went down to 250, 1/125th, 60th, 30th, 15th. I think we get down to an 8th as well, trying to hold them very, very still in a real world situation, because I was outside, it was a little bit windy, there was stuff going on. To see how well the IS worked on both ones. Now, I'll show you the photos in a second, and what you'll see is that I think once I got down to about 60th and below, there was actually too much light. Even at ISO 100, I think I closed up down to f20, but the photos were still being overexposed, so I then had to switch to taking pictures of a sign on a wall. But the results are well, you'll see in a second what actually happens. And the other thing I'd sort of say as well is that, remember, with image stabilization and shooting at lower shutter speeds, you've got to make sure that your subject is still. So it's fine taking pictures of things that aren't moving, but if you're doing sports, it doesn't matter if your image stabilization is good down to a 1/25th of a second or a 30th of a second, because the people who are running around, or the cars that are going to be zooming around, are moving a lot faster than that. So, you've got to always think about that indeed. So, I'll tell you what, enough of me talking. Let's have a look at the stills. Okay, so this is the folder where I've got all the different shots to test the image stabilization. Now, let's have a quick look at a 500th of a second. And again, we're taking a view across the harbour towards the warship. Again, we're at full zoom. So this, for example, this one's with the 55 to 250. I was shooting at f16. You can see the difference in focal length there. And what we'll do is, if we zoom into 1:1, I don't know, a good kind of indications of what's going on is there's like a grid pattern here on the ship, and we've got the ship's badge there. So let's go back to the other one, zoom into 1:1, and what we can really see is that at 500th of a second, as you'd expect, there isn't any real difference at all. Obviously, there's a slight difference in focal length, but both photos look fine to me. So let's come out of that one, and let's go down to a 250th of a second. And we'll do the same thing. So that's the 55 to 250. Let's zoom in. Let's look at that. So we're looking at the badge there and that grid pattern there. Again, if you're watching this on YouTube or Autofocus.com or anyway, if you go to full screen at high quality, you'll get a better idea of what these photos look like. Even better, download the... if you're on YouTube, look in the comment section on robinunfert.com, look at just below the video and you'll see you can download these files and play with them. So at 250th of a second, f16 we're now, there isn't really any difference. When I was taking these photos actually as well, one of the things I did was I took 2 photos each time as well and chose the best one, as you would in the real world. So the image stabilization is working fine on both. No real difference there, so let's come out of there. Now we're moving down quite low now. We're down at 1/125th of a second. Bear in mind we're at 250 millimeters with the 55-250 and we're at 300. So the rule normally would be is if you're at 300 millimeters and you were hand holding, you'd really want to be, and you were you'd always want to be at least 1 over whatever your focal length is. So I don't think there is a 1/300th of a second, is there? But handheld at 300 millimeters, you should be at least 1/250th of a second or even more. So let's go back to so this is the 55-250 at f16 at 1/125th of a second. So let's zoom in and see what we've got. So we can still see the ship's badge and we can still see this grid pattern up here. And let's go to the 70-300 at 300. Let's zoom in. We can still see the ship's badge. So, this is if you haven't played with an image stabilized lens before, this is what you can do. We're at full zoom. It's a windy day. I'm handheld and we've still got photos that are just as sharp as they were at a 500th of a second. So let's come out of that. Now let's go down to a 60th of a second. Here we go. This is where we'll start to see differences. Now, at a 60th of a second at ISO 100, I had to decrease the aperture to f20 to avoid overexposing. But as you can see, they are starting to get a bit brighter, the photos. This is with the 55-250. Let's zoom in. Now, we're starting at a 60th of a second to get a little bit of blurring. Ooh, what did I do there? Start again. Zoom in. We're starting to get a little bit of blurring. That ship's badge isn't quite as... it looks a bit smeary to me, a little bit blurry, and this grid pattern isn't quite as well defined. So let's see how the 70-300 did. Let's zoom in. Right, let's flick backwards and forwards. So that's the 70-300 at a 60th of a second at what was it? f20. Okay, so what we can see here is this is where the 70-300 starts to move ahead. Not only is it a longer focal length, 300 millimeters, the photos look sharper. So this is the image stabilization is working better on the 70-300. As you can see, that's the 70-300. That's the 55-250. I mean, it's still respectable with a bit of sharpening. You could make that look good. And remember, we're 100%. We really are pixel peeping, which is always a bad idea, but that's no problem. Now, let's push it even further. Let's go down to a 30th of a second. Now, what had to happen here, I was overexposing an awful lot. In fact, let me just pause the video because the phone is ringing. Sorry about that. Somebody phoning up to see if we wanted to buy a conservatory. So, yeah, down at a 30th of a second, it was too bright. It was too bright a day for me to be able to take comparative photos of the ships. So I had to go over to this wall and this picture that was closer as well. So the image stabilization, if you imagine it, if you're a little bit closer, the subject, if you like, will be moving at a different angle as well. So this is the 55-250 at a 30th of a second at f16. And then this, let's zoom into 1:1, is the 70-300. And again, we can see the difference. We can see how the 70-300 is performing better because it's nice and clear. We're at 100%, whereas the 55-250 is blurred, isn't it? The 70-300 looks a lot better at a 30th of a second. So let's come out of that one Did I go? Oh, right, 15th of a second. We're really, really slow. So remember, we're at 15th of a second, full handheld at full zoom. So this is the 55 to 250. We can just about read the writing on it. And then if we zoom in, so that is a lens. I'm shooting at 300 millimeters. 300 millimeters at f16. A 15th of a second, and you can still write it. I think that's pretty amazing, isn't it? That's pretty amazing. That is as well. So again, it shows that the 70 to 300 IS at these much slower shutter speed works better than the image stabilization on the 55 to 250. Okay, so from the stills, I think it's pretty apparent that the 70 to 300 IS has a distinct advantage at the slowest shutter speeds over the 55 to 250. They both work well down to about 1/125th of a second at full zoom. But the 70 to 300, taking that picture of those warships, was still usable at a 60th of a second, where the 55 to 250 gets a little bit shaky. And I think, even down to a 30th of a second, the 70 to 300 was still pretty usable. And that is amazing, isn't it? You can shoot handheld something at 300 millimeters and still get acceptable results. And I think, that really surprised me. I was very, very impressed with that as well. But as I said before, just bear in mind that at these really low shutter speeds, at a 30th of a second, your subject has to be still. It's no good trying to take pictures of people running around sports at a 30th of a second, so they're just going to be blurred no matter how good you are at panning or cars or anything like that. That's where you've got to have a high shutter speed, so that's where you've got to pump up your ISO. You've got to have a lens with a big maximum aperture, f2.8, 1.8, that sort of things. So what we're going to do next is let's have a quick look at a couple of video clips of the IS in action on both lenses at full zoom, just to give you actually probably a better idea of how good IS is as well, because when you're looking at still photographs, it's not that obvious. But what you'll see in the following videos is 4 clips, 2 of the 55 to 250, one with IS off, one with IS on, and then with the 75 to 300 with IS off and IS on. And what they will do is they'll also give you an idea of how noisy the image stabilization is, because that might be important if you're planning on using these lenses for doing video work. Okay, so this is the 55 to 250 with the image stabilization off. This is the 55 to 250 IS with the image stabilization on. Oh, I'm on hand holding both. This is the 70 to 300 IS with the image stabilization off, full zoom. This is the 70 to 300 with the image stabilization on at full zoom. So in the videos, you probably noticed that the image stabilization, can't say that word, for the 70-300 was considerably louder than the 55 to 250. Now the 55 to 250 isn't silent image stabilization. You still hear it kind of clicking and grinding and making its kind of noise. But it's definitely a lot quieter than the 70-300. Also bear in mind, when you're doing video, it isn't just about image stabilization, it's about the sound of the zoom and the autofocus motors, and neither of these lenses are the new STM ones, so they make a bit of a racket when they're focusing if you're trying to record video at the same time. But I think for video, probably the 55 to 250 is better because it has the quieter image stabilization. Also, it looked like it wasn't jumping around quite as much. I mean, that could be to do with the fact that this is a longer lens, so you're zoomed in more, so any little movements you make or the image stabilization makes are magnified that little bit. Also the fact that this is a heavier lens, so it's a little bit more difficult to handhold, especially when you're trying to look at the screen, because when you're using the screen, you're kind of holding the camera sort of like this rather than up against your eye like that. I mean, hopefully by looking at that video as well, if you've never really played with an image stabilization lens or seen one in action, that will shows you how good image stabilization is, what a massive difference it makes to your long zooms. I'm never quite sure what difference it really makes to very short lenses, like that new lens I was talking about earlier, the Canon, is it the 10-18 they're doing? Because a very, very short lenses where the angle of view is very, very big, small movements in the lens don't make any difference. But when you're zoomed in on something that's a long way away, a small movement in the lens makes a massive movement on your frame. But I guess the learning point for me is I don't think I'd ever buy a long zoom, a telephoto zoom, without image stabilization. Again, it's just too useful. But we've got to have a winner in the image stabilization category. And despite the video performance, I'm mainly all about stills. You probably are as well. And I think the 70 to 300 IS 4-5.6 definitely has the best image stabilization. Again, they're both good down to 125th of a second, but this has the advantage. Also, I didn't test it in the video because I wasn't really sure how I would test it, but it does have 2 image stabilization modes. It has your normal one, mode 1, for when you're hand holding and kind of wobbling all over the place, but then it has mode 2. And in mode 2, you use it for when you're panning. Say you're doing shots of a motor racing car going past you, so you're panning, and when you're in that mode, the camera's not trying to stabilize this movement because it knows you're moving that way, so it doesn't worry about that. All it does is stabilizes up and down, which could be very, very useful indeed. So there we go. Image stabilization, the winner has to be the 70 to 300. Now, the next category is sharpness of both lenses. So what I did was I put my camera back on the tripod and zoomed in over onto the ship, and then I took photos at various focal lengths. So, for example, I did 100 millimeters, 250 millimeters, 300 millimeters. At wide open on the lenses and at f11, because all lenses work better when they're stopped down a little bit. The disadvantage obviously is you end up with a longer shutter speed. And also I did a long focal length, but I also did a closer focal length as well. Because if you can imagine, if you're focusing on something that's a long way away, that can be very different to even if you're still zoomed in, but at something that's very, very close. So the main thing was to check them both to see, is the 70 to 300 significantly better or better at all than the 55 to 250, because there is a big difference in price. So let's have a look at the stills and come up with some answers. Okay, so here we go. We're going to have a look at sharpness tests. So let's start off with the 100 millimeter kind of focal length. So both lenses are zoomed to 100 millimeters, and I shot at their widest aperture that was available, and I'll stop down to f11 as well. So let's start off with the 55 to 250. So here we go. We've got the 55 to 250 at 100 millimeters at f5.6. Let's zoom in. Looks fine to me. I've got no complaints. There might be a little bit of flare actually in this picture, but again, if you fitted a lens hood. So now let's have a look at the 55 again, but we've stopped down to f11. Let's zoom in. And that's... Alright, yes, I remember this one. Actually, yes, there is. The f11 photo definitely looks a little bit sharper. We've got more definition in this gridded pattern here than we have in this particular one. So probably at 100 millimeters, if you're focusing on something a long way away, you're better off stopping down if you're using the 55 to 250. So let's go on to the 70 to 300. Again, 100 millimeters. This time we're at f4.5. What you find is with the 70 to 300, it can be wider at the same focal length. So it's letting a little bit more light in. So let's zoom in. So first off, let's just compare the 70 to 300 at 100 at 4.5 to the 55 to 250 at f11. And let's just flick back to see if there's any appreciable difference in the two lenses. I don't know, they look almost identical to me. So let's go on and see if the 70-300 f11, let's zoom into 100%, looks any different. Here we go. So that's at 4.5, and that's f11. 4.5, f11. The photos look the same to me. Now, I'm not bothering having... Well, go on, let's have a look then. Let's have a look at something in the corner. What can we see in the corner? I don't know. This ship over here. Let's go right over to one side. So what have we got over here? There's like a some sort of davit or crane over there, isn't there? So let's go back to the 55. Let's go in the corner, because I know when people are testing lenses, they talk about corner sharpness, don't they? So let's have a look. So we're looking at this davit. I can't see all the detail. Is it any significantly different in the 75? Actually, I was probably... We're going to have to... Let's have a look at this frigate, actually. The mast, that might be a bit easier. Come back to the mast. So we can see quite a bit of detail, can't we? Not much difference is there, I don't think. So, if I shut that down, I think really at 100mm, you could argue that the 55mm is slightly softer when it's wide open at f5.6 than 70-300, but there really isn't that much difference. So, now let's look at the extremes of focal length. So what we're doing here is, I'm looking at the 55 and the 250 and the 70-300 at their maximum focal lengths at 5.6 and then f11. So this is the 55 to 250 at 250mm at f5.6. Let's zoom into 100%. Remember, we're on a tripod as well, and that looks that looks pretty damn good to me. You know, I'm pleased with that. Let's see if it's any sharper at f11. Zoom into 100%. Let's just flick backwards and forwards. So 5.6, f11, 5.6, f11. Let's have a look at this grid. Can we see anything different on the grid? So f11, maybe a fraction softer. But again, you would expect that. You would expect a lens to form and look better when it's stopped down. So this is the 70-300 at 5.6. We're at 300mm. So let's zoom in. So it's at full zoom. Again, we're on a tripod. That looks pretty damn good to me. I don't know about you. So let's have a look. If same focal length, same length, but taken down to f11. Let's have a look. So let's compare the two. So 5.6. This grid looks okay. We can see we can make out we can even make out the details in the ship's badge there. How amazing is that? We can, over on the left hand side here, we can see near this gun, we can see the grid of the safety rail. So let's go up to f11. We can still see the badge. And we can still make that out. You know, I mean, there's nothing in it, is there? I think those lenses, the 70-300 full zoom, does it make a difference going from f11 to 5.6? Not much. They both look pretty damn good. And, you know, that's back to the 55 to 250. No, that looks pretty good as well. Now, the next one, what I've done now is I've put the teleconverter on as well. We've got the 2x Jessop's teleconverter. Let's zoom in for this one. In case I forget later on, when you put a teleconverter on the 70-300, because of the maximum aperture that it has being quite small, you lose autofocus. So you have to do manual focusing, which generally means you've got to be very careful. It helps an awful lot if you go to live view and then zoom in and use the focus peaking. But that can be quite difficult if you're outside in bright sunshine. So what we're looking at here is, this is the 70-300 with a 2x teleconverter shot at I can't remember. What was it shot at? f11. And let's compare it. So let's move that up so it's the same. So that's without the teleconverter. That's with the teleconverter. Let's come over and have a look at this grid. So we can still make out this gun very simply, and we can still make that. So let's have a look at this writing up here. I mean, it's a bit smeary, isn't it? I mean, we've got a little bit of chromatic aberration coming on, but I mean, that's pretty damn good, isn't it? I mean, I picked up the Jessup's teleconverter for, I think it was about £5 from the car boot sale. I think they're about £70 to buy, and they're not made by Jessup's, they're just like a generic one, and they put their name on it. But there we go. So that's the 70-300 without the teleconverter and with the teleconverter. I think that's pretty good. I think though, probably if we move, let's have a look, if we go over to the edges, we're going to start to see, I don't know, we can still see the aerial there, can't we? That's not bad. We can still see the rungs, we can still see this. And remember, there's no post-processing being done to these photos either. So that's the far. So let's have a look at something closer now. So what we're looking at here is the 55-250 at 100mm at f8. And what we're looking at here is how sharp it is, because I was probably only standing about 8-9 feet away from this subject, and we're all subjects of statue, and we're looking at the quality of the background blur as well, because if we're taking portraits of people, we want a nice background blur. So that looks nice, doesn't it? So that's at f8. f5.6, which would have been the widest aperture available at 100mm. That tree's nicely blurred. These kind of brighter things, they're nice wide circular blurs. So that's 5.6. Sorry, that's f8, and that's 5.6. You know, that's fine, isn't it? I mean, that would make a nice portrait. So let's go to the 70-300 again. This one is at 5.6 this time, 100mm, and then f8. As you'd expect, you've got a slight difference in the quality of the blur, but again, it's still a nice blur. And in fact, let's zoom in now and have a look at sharpness. So, you know, I mean, I don't know about you, but that looks pretty. That looks pretty good to me. I think it's 4.5 actually on the 75. Let's zoom in now at f8. Yeah, I mean, we can make out the little bits. We can make out the imperfections in the statue. I can't really see any difference there. So let's go to these 55-250. Let's zoom in. Let's have a look at those same areas, those kind of imperfections in this area. In the casting, you might be slightly softer, but remember, we're at 100% here. We're real pixel peeping, which is something I don't like doing, because how often you can look at a photograph like this? You're just not, are you? But I don't think there's much difference between the f8 and the 5.6. Maybe slightly sharper on the 100mm, at 100mm on the 70-300, but there isn't much in it at all. Okay, so what did you think of the sharpness test? Again, if you haven't already, if you're watching the video on YouTube or robinonphoto.com, just go down below. You can download these actual photos to have a look at them yourself. I think for me, both lenses look pretty good at all the focal lengths and all the apertures. You could probably say that at 100mm, the 55-250 looked a little bit better if it was stopped down. Now, when I was taking these photos, again, I took 2 photos of each focal length at each aperture, just in case there was a duff one. And it could have just been a duff shot where the wind caught the tripod a little bit overall. But especially when we got to a close subject, there wasn't anything to really choose in between them, and there wasn't really that much difference in stopping them down. I didn't think myself. With the photos of the statue close, I think obviously the backgrounds look better at 5.6 and 4.5. But I always think that's one of the great strengths of the 55-250. I think it's a great portrait lens as well. You don't have to rush out and buy an 85 1.8 or 135 2.8. You just set your telephoto zoom to 100mm or just below, and it will make a very pleasing, flattering portrait lens. You could argue that when we were looking very, very close, the 70-300 IS might have been a tad sharper, but I don't think really there's anything in it. And as far as background blur or bokeh, or buckets, whatever people call it, I think they both look nice, and there isn't anything to choose between them. So, in the sharpness category, I'm going to call it a draw. There's no difference, I don't think, really, between these two lenses. The 70-300 isn't significantly better than the 55 to 250. Maybe a little bit controversial, that, but, I don't know. So, autofocus speed, something quite close to my heart, because we want our lenses to focus as fast as possible, don't we? To go from near to far, or far to near, so that we don't miss that shot. It's one of the joys of having a digital SLR. It's one of the joys of having an autofocus camera in general, even if it's a film one, in the fact that you press your finger and it focuses. So the question is, does the extra cash of the 70 to 300 buy you any increase in autofocus speed? Now, after looking at some other websites, the way that they measure autofocus speed, because I was thinking, how can I do it? What I decided to do was, like other people, I recorded the sound of them focusing. So I set up the 70-300 and the 55 to 250, and I set it manually so it was focused on something closer. Then I moved it, excuse me, so it was pointing at something far away, turned on the autofocus, started recording, and then made it focus. And then I did it in reverse, and I did it with the 55 to 250 as well. And then I took those audio files into Audacity, zoomed in, kind of pinched out everything else, and then just isolated the zzz and the beep of it focusing and then getting focus lock, and then just looked at the timestamp up above, and that gave me some times. And to cut a long story short, there really isn't any difference. The 70 to 300, focusing from something near to something far, took about 0.95 of a second, and that includes the autofocus lock at the end as well. And going, whereas the 55 to 250, actually they were saying the 55 to 250 saying 0.95, the 70 to 300 0.95. When we're going the other way, so the lens was focused on something far away, and then I got it to focus on something closer. The 7300 took 0.75 of a second, where the 55 to 250 took 0.85, so a tenth of a second longer. This isn't really scientific. I did it a couple of times for each one just to average them out. Sometimes the results might have been affected by the camera started going the other way. So instead of just focusing straight further away, it might have tried to focus on something closer and then shoots the other way. But the kind of the verdict on autofocus speed is there isn't any difference between the 75 to 300 and the 55 to 250. The extra cash of the 7300 doesn't give you faster focusing speed than the 55 to 250. So this category is a draw as well. Right, next up, price. This is the killer, isn't it? So the 55 to 250 on Amazon.co.uk, brand new, goes for about £170, a bit cheaper if it's on offer, or about $300 in America. Whereas the 70 to 300 IS is about £377 at the moment on Amazon.co.uk, and about $650 in the USA. So there's a massive price difference between these two lenses. Obviously, the second-hand prices vary, but if you keep an eye on Craigslist in the USA or Gumtree in the UK, you might be able to pick up a bargain like I did. But normally in the UK, you're looking at £200 plus for a second-hand one of these. So I think this category, it's really easy, isn't it? That the winner has to be the 55 to 250. It's half the price of the 70 to 300, and it is not half the lens. So there we go. We've been through all the categories. If we look at the different things, the 55 to 250 IS2 is definitely the best value for money. It's the lightest and it's the smallest, and it has the ability to focus the closest. The 70 to 300, on the other hand, has the best focal range. It can go to 300mm. You can use it with a teleconverter. It has better image stabilization. It's built better, and it has the most versatile lens mount because you can mount it to EF and EFS lens mount, so you can do full frame and crop sensor bodies. However, they both autofocus at virtually the same speed, and more importantly, I don't think really there's much to choose in terms of image quality or sharpness between the two. And to my untrained eye, I know I didn't really do a test about it, but I don't think there's any difference in colour reproduction, or EQ sometimes people call it as well. So if we go back to my original questions, with the last one first, is it worth upgrading from the 55 to 250 IS2 to the 70-300 IS, I've got to say, in my opinion, the answer is no. The 55-250 is a great lens, and the 70-300 isn't significantly better. Sure, it's a little bit longer in reach, but only by 50mm. And if you go back to the focal length comparison, it isn't that much. And with big megapixel sensors, you can just crop in that little bit. And I don't think it's the difference you'd have to pay to get that. Now, if you can pick up a real bargain like I did, where I got this one for 130 quid, then maybe. But I think if one of the things you could do is you could rent the lens first, couldn't you? You could try it out. And I think if I'd rented this lens and tried it out, I wouldn't pay to upgrade the 55-250, because I think the 55-250 is just too good. It really is a really nice lens. So, is it worth upgrading? In my opinion, no, don't. Put your money towards something else. So, the question is a little bit more complicated if you've only got a kit lens and you're looking for your first IS telephoto zoom. If your budget is big enough and you're into wildlife photography or any type of photography where you need to get close to the action, then the 70-300 IS is worth looking at. And the 70-300 will stand you in good stead if you're thinking about going full frame in the near future as well. And they do hold their value, so you can get good money for them afterwards. However, if you are on a budget, don't think you're getting an inferior lens if you get the 55-250 IS. It's just as sharp as its bigger brother, and you can carry it all round all day without its weight bothering you. Now, don't get fooled into buying the non-IS version of the 70-300, or I don't know if they do a non-IS version of this one, but they definitely do a non-IS version of 70-300. Don't buy it. Spend that little bit extra and get the 55-250. Similarly, don't get a non-IS Sigma or Tamron. They do 70-300s because, hopefully you've watched the video and you've seen that the image stabilization is so good and works so well. So, if you're thinking about buying your first IS telephoto zoom, I would say, consider the 70-300, but you're not getting a bad lens with the 55-250. I really like it. So what am I going to do? I don't need 2 telephoto zooms, and as I said at the beginning, I could sell the 70-300 for a nice profit and put the money towards something different, like I don't know, one of the things, or I could sell the 55-250. I think I'm going to keep the 70-300 IS. I've kind of got this project at the back of my mind where I get hold of some older Canon Pro DSLRs like the 5D Mark I and the 1D Mark II N to do reviews of them. I want to do like classic digital camera reviews, and so I'll need an EF telephoto lens to do that. Plus, I can use the 70-300 on my Canon film bodies as well, which is always good. And I think probably the overriding factor why I would keep it is the fact that I got it for such a cheap bargain, and a bit like the 50 Mark I 1.8 I got from the car boot for a few quid, metal mount one. I don't like selling anything that I got. I know if I sold this lens for, I don't know, 200 quid, I would never be able to get it again. And the fact that I got it for £130 kind of really endears it to my heart. Now, that's it for the review. Hopefully I've answered your questions, showed you a little bit more about it. But it has been subjective. It's all about my opinion. And it's all about, these examples of the glass I've got. And you might not agree. But again, make your own decision. Download those photographs that you can see in the description below the YouTube video on roblandphoto.com and zoom in and have a look at them. I've bundled them all together now. It is a big folder. It's 150 megabytes. But unzip it and then have a look at them, get really close and make your own decision. Do some post-processing on them as you want, but please remember, I retain the copyright. I don't use them, publish them on the web or do anything else with them. They're just for use at home for you to decide whether you want to buy the 55-250 or the 70-300 IS lenses. Right, well, that's it from me. Thanks for hanging on in there. I know this has been a really long review, but I wanted to go in depth to really answer those questions so you can go away from now after watching this video and think, right, I know which lens I'm probably going to buy. Remember, you can email me with further questions, scalespeeder@gmail.com. You can check out roblandphoto.com. You can put some comments down below. If you like the videos, please subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you again soon.